Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Marcela Quintero. I'm the Research Director for Multifunctional Landscapes at the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CIAT. And I'm happy today to present this together with my colleague Ermias Betemerian that works for the Crescent C4. Both of us has been involved in the CGIAR program on water, land, and ecosystems over the past years, and we have been collaborating under the flagship on restoring degraded lands. So today we would like to share some of the lessons that we get from the work that we have together with our partners conducted on this program. So first of all, I would like to say that we want to share 6 main lessons and that I think they are key for the work ahead and the challenges ahead that we have in restoration in Africa. So the first lesson is about the power of information to catalyze restoration actions in Africa. So WLE and its partners and funders have made a tremendous investment in developing, consolidating, and sharing soil information. So this information is not a bottleneck anymore for the design of sound and context-appropriate restoration actions. Why soils information? I mean, restoration is beyond trees. And for long-lasting restoration efforts, we need to sustain those on healthy soils. So in WLE, we made available information tools for restoration practitioners. So for example, we have made available the Global Soil Data Manager for Sub-Saharan Africa, and with hundreds of users already registered there. Also, we supported the Africa Soil Information System project that includes a soil health surveillance system. Currently, we have approximately 17 countries using the soil infrared spectral technology that is part of this soil health surveillance system. The second lesson or message that we want to communicate today is about the importance of scientific evidence for supporting investment cases in soil health restoration. And again, why soil health restoration? About 65% of the agricultural land in sub-Saharan Africa is degraded due to the poor management practices, which induce declines in soil biological, chemical, and physical quality, and this reduces the capacity of soil to support crop production and to provide other ecosystem services. So WLE has worked on building evidence on how and at what extent and in what conditions management practices improve soil health and then influence the delivery of several ecosystem services, like regulation of water flow, changes in soil biodiversity, or reduction of greenhouse gases. This is important because the primary focus in soil health management over the years has been in increasing crop productivity, but to a lesser extent in the associated environmental benefits. So given the momentum and the promotion of management practices to restore soil health is that WLE has built evidence on the environmental benefits of improving soil health as evidence to support the creation of investment cases for soil health restoration in Africa. My next message has to be with the science, the importance of science to inform action and investment. As restoration delivers multiple benefits and there is a diversity of management practices to restore soils and landscapes, there is then a critical need to start moving from general restoration investments toward investments that are more targeted, depending on the priority benefits. And those priority benefits change to one side to the other. So in this sense, science is needed to develop tools that help matching better restoration actions with the benefits of interest for the different stakeholders. So WLE advanced quite a lot on developing these tools and maps for targeting better restoration actions. So for example, we developed for Africa a map that shows us where is the highest potential to sequester carbon in agricultural lands if these are better manage and restore. Or in Ethiopia, we are finalizing the development of a tool that is called the Landscape Doctor Toolbox that help us to match different restoration options with different type of benefits depending on what is the benefits that the stakeholders wants to maximize. For example, soil erosion, crop productivity, water flows, and so on. The other aspect that we also want to bring here is regarding monitoring landscape restoration. So what happened after investment? How we can improve our accountability in terms of delivering the expected impacts of restoration. So WLE has made an important contribution in developing and implementing monitoring frameworks to assess soils at large scales with a lot of efficiency and at a lower cost. So for that, ICRAF have been combining infrared spectral technologies with remote sensing, and right now, ICRAF has supported 31 labs in 19 countries across Africa in order to improve their capacity to monitor restoration options in the field. And then my two last comment has to be with policy. I think scientists, we are learning more on how to engage better with policy processes to support the policy implementation. So one example is that we supported the land degradation neutrality target of the UNCCD through its science policy interface. Basically and specifically, we brought together CGIAR experience on assessing soil carbon sequestration to develop guidelines that can be applied in different contexts and that can also help level the field at the moment of reporting restoration actions and achievement across different countries. And to finalize, this interface between science and policies has to be in two ways. It's not only that science informs policy implementation, but also we need policy change to amplify the power of science. So here we brought this example in Ethiopia, where soil degradation and uncertain climate conditions are really threatening smallholders and poor farmers across the countries. This means that Ethiopia, a society that is agricultural based, is struggling to produce food for a quickly growing population. So part of the solutions lies in determining the appropriate management of soil fertility for a given location. However, although this can be done rapidly through digital agriculture, agriculture is the less digitalized sector in the country and in other countries as well. And also soils and agronomy data that is in different organizations that has worked in the country for many years is not shared or not ready to be used for many. So with the support of the Ethiopian Ministry of Agriculture, we establish and we participate in a national task force to develop a soil and agronomy data sharing policy for Ethiopia. After many rounds of work in this task force, the policy was launched, and now we have a group of different organizations that are working on developing digital information systems to support more appropriate soil management and try to restore the soils in Ethiopia that are key for feeding their growing population. So with this, I would like to finalize this presentation. Thank you.
So good day to you. This presentation is on how management of river flow can be used as part of landscape restoration, in particular of floodplain landscapes. And it is first necessary to define what environmental flows or E-flows are. These are the river flows necessary to sustain aquatic ecosystems, which in turn support human cultures, economies, livelihoods, and well-being. It is clear from this definition that E-flows can contribute directly to the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, as they are a key measure of ecosystem condition. We make use of a model called PropFlow, which sets out to document and organize all of the evidence to estimate the E-flows. This can be quite complex. If we move from left to right in this figure, we evaluate the sources of stress in the basin, for example, agriculture, dam development, mines, etc., and document how they exert stress through changes in water quantity, quality, habitats, and how this impacts on a series of endpoints that include livelihoods such as farming, grazing, and building material collection, as well as protection of the ecosystem itself. The key thing in the assessment of e-flows is to establish the relationship between water flow and a variety of ecosystem components. This is first done by describing how the river flow changes the in-stream habitat. And in this example, the graph on the left shows the cross-section of a river and a range of water levels, each of which is flowing at a particular depth and velocity. All of these factors determine how the ecosystem will operate, which species can live where, and so on. In the case of a floodplain, we summarize the issues that a flood peak arriving on the floodplain will have for the fish population, for example. So going from left to right, we start in the dry months when most of the fish will be in deep pools, and then at the first sign of an increase in flow, the fish migrate onto the floodplain with ever rising water. The fish eggs on the floodplain hatch, and the small fish grow extremely fast before they return to the river as the floodplain shrinks. So we need to know all of this information. The evidence of this flow-fish relationship and all the others are combined into Bayesian networks, all integrated together, because at the end of the day, they are all influencing each other. And these are integrated so that the river flows that will provide the optimal combination of ecosystem protection and livelihood support are described as the e-flows. In the example of the Inner Niger Delta in Mali, North Africa, we have a floodplain of some 30,000 square kilometers that has a massive variable flooding regime that supports more than 1.5 million people and 4 million stock animals. The challenge with the e-flows on the Niger floodplain is to estimate how much water is required to flood onto the floodplain in different months of the year. So this hydrograph shows the flood peak arriving on the floodplain. A number of scenarios are plotted with the e-flow graph shown as the dotted orange line. If this flow is ensured on the floodplain, then it can be assured that the ecosystem will be optimally protected and that livelihoods will be supported. Thank you. I hope you found that useful. Just a demonstration of how e-flows can actually contribute to landscape management and sustainable development.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are participating in the current Global Landscape Forum event. My name is Brhanu Zamatim Brhanu. I am a senior scientist working in ICRISAT on land and water management. ICRISAT is a CGIAR center which contributes to the CGIAR agenda, which is ending hunger by 2030 through science to transform food, land, and water in a climate crisis. ICRISAT has a vision to have a prosperous, food secure, and resilient dryland tropics, and has a mission of reducing poverty, hunger, malnutrition, and environmental degradation in the dryland tropics. ICRISAT promotes smart foods, which are millet and sorghum, which are good for you, good for the planet, and good for the farmer. These crops have high iron content, have high zinc content, high in protein and antioxidants. Millet and sorghum can grow with minimal fertilizers and pesticides. Particularly, millet needs mean annual rainfall, which is less than 400 millimeters, and these crops survive in hot, dry conditions. The challenges of the semi-arid tropics are many. Degradation is the main one. When degradation is aggravated by extreme weather events and lack of improved technologies, the consequences are many. Poor crop management practices has consistently yielded less than 1 ton per hectare in many of the semi-arid tropics. The graph that you see in the bottom shows the yield of sorghum, which is less than 1 ton per hectare for the past 30 years in southern Mali. So the objective of our land and water management work in the semi-arid tropics is to provide solutions to improve crop productivity, erosion control, and socioeconomic benefits, and also promoting participatory watershed management practices to help to scale technologies in different agroecologies. The intervention practices are implemented at different scales, land at plot scale, farm field scale, and also landscape scale. These are examples of the different technologies like the hydraulic structures, Zeiss, half moons, and FNR techniques, contour and stone bands, and etc. We have community-driven restoration practices in different landscapes where we train farmers to delimit points of equal elevation across the landscapes, and seedlings are planted by farmers and also protected protected from the animal damage. And when these trees grow, they can be cut in dry season to feed animals. The impacts or the outcomes of this integrated land and water management practice are many, like we have high productivity gains and better economic benefits, improved health of the ecosystem and soil nutrient improvements, and evidence of data generation, which help to support regional and national decision making policies. So the key message here are the technologies are practical and socially acceptable. Practices are tailored according to biophysical and socioeconomic conditions, and farmers are at the center point of implementing these practices. This helps to pave a way to scale technologies and practices widely. We have a readily available scaling strategies, and livelihood diversification and resilience building was happening through a number of combination of technologies, and we are working towards achieving the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration Vision, which is preventing and halting, reversing the degradation of ecosystem services worldwide. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Professor Tamana. I work with Alliance of Biodiversity and SIAT based in Ethiopia at Sawa. I'll try to provide some highlights on our work related to landscape restoration in Ethiopia. The work has been implemented by WLE and different partners. So, Ethiopia is a big country of more than 110 million people, over 1.1 million square kilometers, and it is seriously affected by land degradation, whereby close to 50% of the highlands are degraded. And also the country has been impacted by serious degradation with a cost of more than 3 billion USD per year. However, restoration can reclaim this problem significantly, where evidence show a $1 investment can bring an investment or a return of about $4, which is a good thing because it highlights that the restoration can tackle some of the critical problems of land degradation. As a result, Ethiopia has invested a lot on land restoration over the last 50 years. And recently, over $1.2 billion has been invested on restoration of the major four regions. There is also a huge investment and effort to contribute to FR100, where the country promised to restore 15 million hectares. And currently, there is an initiative by the Prime Minister, Green Legacy Initiative, which aims to plant 5 to 6 billion trees a year. And this year, also the planning process is taking place. So we will present two examples. One is the complementary or linked technologies, the need to implement complementary technologies following the landscape continuum in order to generate multiple products or services from those interventions. Because in most cases, the experience is to implement one kind of intervention, like afforestation or trees, on some part of the landscape, while then there is a need to integrate different interventions across the landscape in order to get multiple benefits for multiple users. This is what we tried to do and what we have been doing. And our experience shows that this kind of intervention has more significant impact and even reduces conflict between upslope and downslope users. Another very important component that is mostly missed is evidence generation. in most cases, this evidence are not generated adequately. When there is no baseline data in most cases, even though there is a huge investment on land restoration. So we have in our learning watersheds, tried to collect evidence as much as possible and also at a national scale. For example, in order to demonstrate how maintaining intact system, natural forest can benefit in sequestering carbon, and how degraded landscape can lose a huge amount of carbon, was demonstrated by work across the country from different regions. Large number of data sets collected following land use chrono sequence. So we can see the numbers where in the forest areas there is a high amount of soil organic carbon, 144 tons per hectare, for example, while in open grazing areas there is very small, around 31 tons per hectare. And we can see the changes. When we transition from forest to open grazing, there is a loss of more than 110 tons per hectare. And you can see other figures for other components. And when we do restoration from open grazing to afforestation, well-maintained afforested system, there is a gain of around 90 tons per hectare of soil, soil carbon for the top soil. So this shows that while degradation can cause significant loss of soil carbon, restoration can still enable to bring in the carbon back to the system, important contribution. Then, the problem or common problem observed in Ethiopia, for example, is impacts are analyzed considering only one parameter. It can be crop yield or biomass or soil erosion or water yield, but that can underestimate the real function of restoration, because we have to really analyze the different components, the different ecosystem services that can be acquired through restoration. So if you see on the left side is an area before restoration, the same area on the right side is after restoration. And you can see significant differences in different sub-functions of services, crop yield, canopy cover, biomass, and so on. This has been done for about 4 sites, and we are going to include other parameters such as pollination, biodiversity, and so on, so that we will have as comprehensive evidence as possible for those restored areas. We also did a national analysis. There are huge interventions across the country, and we reviewed literature which analyzed the impacts of those interventions. Around 120 papers were reviewed and meta-analysis conducted. And the result shows that biological options complemented with enclosures, conservation agriculture, really provide significantly higher yield, soil carbon, and also play a significant role in reducing soil erosion compared to some of the interventions such as Anaju or terrace only. So this can provide an evidence on what we should plan where. The next one, very important parameter that should be considered is trade-off analysis. So in land restoration, we implement different practices across space, and the likelihood of trade-offs is higher, even though we try to implement complementary options. So we conducted trade-off analysis across at national level and at landscape levels. Also, on the left, you can see, for example, some of the interventions, how conservation agriculture provides significantly to productivity and lower in terms of runoff and so on. So the results are based on the review work. On the right side, you can see the spatial distribution. What is a trade-off in terms of yield and erosion reduction if we implement conservation agriculture across different parts. So this will be analyzed in detail further. This is a preliminary result, that these are good indicators on how we need to also consider trade-offs so that we plan our interventions. Generally, our results and experiences in the country can have some implications over the decades for other restoration efforts. Some conclusions. Number one, I think we have to aspire creating multifunctional landscapes, but that should not be about ecosystems. It has to be about providing benefits for farmers in terms of resilience, productivity, food security, and so on. In addition, there is a need for systematic monitoring of efforts. There are huge investments being made, but not comprehensive analysis of impact is made. That is very critical to be conducted. And also there is even a lack of baseline data in some cases. It's also very important to assess the multiple impacts of those practices instead of single or two parameters or services. It will be very important to analyze the comprehensive impacts interventions so that we don't underestimate the value of restoration. The scaling up is critical and very important to sustain the restoration practices, but that needs strong financial support and very robust governance system. So this should be in place to achieve the plan of restoration. And finally, our observation shows that some targeting and scaling tools may be necessary in terms of decision support because there are some gaps in implementing landscape restoration following the whole restoration pathway, like from identifying problems, diagnosis to implementation, impact assessment, and trade-off analysis. So a certain decision support tool may be useful to facilitate targeting and scaling. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Marlene Ilias, and I'm the gender lead at the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CIAT. I'm delighted to be here with you today to share some of the research we've been doing on restoration, which forms the basis of a call to action. So to all restorationists representing governments, research organizations, environmental development organizations who are bringing the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration in with hope, with excitement, and who are contributing to ambitious restoration initiatives. And that call is that restoration is about trees, it's about soils, biodiversity, climate, ecosystems, but at its core, it's about people. So the people who manage these ecosystems, whose livelihoods are intimately tied with the landscapes being restored, and who stand to benefit or to lose the most from restoration. So the UN Decade underscores the links between restoration, local livelihoods, and achieving all of the sustainable development goals. But these links have to be intentionally pursued rather than assumed. And unfortunately, the research that we've done over the years shows that restoration initiatives, which range from international agendas to regional initiatives to national policies and programs, projects, research, mainly continue to overlook critical social, political, cultural issues related to restoration. So because the field of restoration is dominated by the natural sciences, and because we're looking for technical solutions that can be applied at scale, restoration approaches tend to be quite top-down, prescriptive, and ecologically focused. But we know that restoration is actually quite messy, that what works is context-specific, and that how people manage their lands depends on a range of socioeconomic, political issues, such as rights to land and to other resources, such as their ability to make a living off of that land and the resources it offers, such as assets and so much more. So we may have the best technologies, but local land managers may not have the incentives or the capacities to implement these. So to shed light on those issues and to learn from good practices and also from challenges in the field, we just published a special issue in the journal Ecological Restoration with 11 contributions from researchers and practitioners, NGO staff, government actors, community voices, working across disciplines to document and to think critically about what constitutes socially inclusive restoration. And I invite you to look at those contributions if you can. But as we did this, we also realized that there's a need for practical guidance that summarizes the findings of the paper. So we brought them together in a succinct synthesis article that offers 10 golden rules for socially sustainable restoration. And this article responds to a similar one that I'm posting here on DiSacco and colleagues that mostly focuses on biophysical aspects of restoration, though they do acknowledge the need to engage stakeholders and to secure economic returns to local people through restoration. So ours is a little bit of a complement to this article, and I'll take the rest of my time to go over our 10 golden rules for socially sustainable restoration. And we refer here to social sustainability to highlight our emphasis on the social aspects, which are often overlooked, as I mentioned, in restoration. But we recognize that the term is a little bit redundant since sustainability necessarily includes social dimensions. So the idea is not to imply that social issues are external to sustainability, but really to draw attention to them in the field of restoration here. So here are rules. I won't have a chance to explain them all, but I hope you can look at the article when it's published and find some food for thought and guidance in it. So they cover all stages of a restoration project or program cycle. So the first one here is about recognizing diversity and interrelations among stakeholders, and recognizing also that these different stakeholders, these actors, and their interests and their capacities can evolve throughout a restoration process. So actors can be found at multiple levels, from multinational corporations to national policymakers, research institutes, and a very large diversity of rural women and men, farmers who make a living off of the lands or other ecosystems under restoration. So this rule is really about recognizing these different actors who have legitimate claims to have a voice and influence in restoration, to understand their motivations, their aspirations, their constraints and opportunities in restoration, and also the power relations among them. So how they relate to each other and to restoration initiatives. So doing this may require bringing in new social analysis skills in your restoration project teams in order to do this well. A second rule is around addressing socio-historical context. So we know that restoration initiatives are quite used to considering the ecological history of a landscape, but they often don't examine the human history of these landscapes and how economic and political processes at many scales have been driving degradation over time. So this rule is really about examining this history and possible resource-related tensions as well that may be a result of this history, to avoid triggering or accentuating conflict and jeopardizing the legitimacy of projects. I'll give more detail on 5, but I just want to mention the 2 in between: unpacking and strengthening local tenure for marginalized groups, and actively engaging communities as agents of change. So number 5 is about tackling equality across its multiple dimensions and scales. And this is really about thinking about which groups. I mentioned a range of different groups before, but landless farmers, rural women, which actors are recognized as legitimate actors in restoration, ensuring that they have a voice and that they have influence over restoration agendas, and considering whether they can reap the benefits and share the costs and the risks of restoration. It's also about recognizing equity across scales, so from within the household to the community level to relations between communities and the state, for example, and recognizing equity in the temporal sense, so also in terms of intergenerational equity and also several other dimensions of equity. The other rules, there's one, as you can see here, about generating multiple benefits, including social benefits from restoration, promoting the equitable distribution of costs and benefits, mitigating risks, drawing on different types of evidence and knowledge, questioning dominant discourses, and practicing inclusive, holistic monitoring, learning, and evaluation. So all of these rules really highlight the need to bring a very interdisciplinary perspective and teams with different skill sets together to bridge the natural and the social sciences, and to collaborate among different groups of stakeholders to give us the best chance of generating initiatives that address the complex problems that restoration is meant to address. So I'll stop here, but I do hope that you can consult these rules to bring equity and inclusiveness considerations at the center of restoration practice. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this session where we want to discuss the importance of actively looking for synergistic solutions and minimizing trade-offs for long-term success in restoring African drylands. And we put success in quotation mark because success is relative to when, how, and by who is measured. And that's exactly what we want to spark. We want to spark discussions, ideas, and motivations for getting better, how to on measuring success on multiple aspects beyond the economic, the environmental and ecological aspects. And one of the key characteristics of restoration is that for going downhill, we don't need active or collective action. But if we want to go upwards in the restoration pathway, so we do need collective action, participatory or active engagement of multiple stakeholders. And we also need landscape level planning for restoring the processes, services, and functions that restore agricultural ecosystems in drylands can provide. But yet this long-term process of going upwards is often challenged by the short-term or the short span of restoration projects. So then the question is how with these short-term projects we can better respond and better help landscapes going in the upwards pathway to move faster and better in achieving or restoring their ecosystem. And one of the key aspects is that we need to focus or look beyond the environmental and ecological performance. We know that restoration projects have multiple cascade in multiple direct and indirect benefits on different domains, and one, for example, is human well-being, and not only on these different petals, but also how the restoration project cascaded the plot and field, farm, household, landscape, national, and so on. So let me start with some ideas that we want to put forward on how to better capture, how to better account for the long-term success. And these reflection points are based on the collective work and research by CGIAR and non-CGIAR researchers. So then the first point that we want to put forward is put people and their well-being at the center when restoring African drylands. And this is grounded in the idea that well-being is often measured as material aspects. When we know that there are three universal domains, and relational and quality of life are very important as well, as we found in a novel study in Brazil, where we ask people how they perceive the work on integrative landscapes like fauna and resets affected their human well-being. And then we had also two other landscapes with a more sectoral entry point, like protected area and soybean. And what we found is totally opposite signatures. What we see is more positive impacts on quality of life, relational, material aspects, and then we see the opposite impact and more negative direct impacts on aspects like health or even economic aspects. So again, the restoration, the success aspect is different. And if we measure the success of the more sectoral landscape approaches with hectares, number of hectares protected, or with the yield attained, the story of success will be different. So again, how we can get better at capturing those direct or indirect effects on human well-being beyond material aspects. Also, we know that from surveying and discussing with practitioners, landscape practitioners, we know that achieving change at the landscape level, it requires investing a lot on coordination, planning, mediation, and training, building the capacity and bringing people together to move upwards. And this is this requires long-term investments. So then the question when thinking about restoring African drylands is how can we get better at investing, for example, multi-stakeholder platforms and measuring the impact of those investments. So the second point that we want to put forward is a reflection on rethinking agriculture in restored agricultural drylands. And we know that there's agriculture is beyond yield or calories, and there's more evidence showing the importance of diversifying not only for ecosystem services, but also for resilience and for stability. So is how we can identify interventions that support diversification, but also that measure better the comparative advantage of diversified systems. Like, for example, by using the land equivalent ratio or other metrics that capture beyond yield. The third reflection point is that we want to assess, anticipate, and manage trade-offs. We need to bring together or marry the local knowledge and desires and visions and projections and use and mobilize models to see or foresee or anticipate the impacts of the selected interventions. One example is the bioeconomic model from design, which was developed and actively improved to account for better metrics. And here, for example, in Kenya, we see that the solutions improve vitamin A, but it doesn't contribute to a household free budget. So it helps to see what are the other activities in tandem that needs to be put in place to have a better impact. Again, this is another model, stochastic impact evaluation framework that has been used in Ethiopia to guide the interventions that were collectively selected and identify not only what are the impact of those interventions in restoration, but also on the risk that they pose to farmers. And for example, they found out that sheep rearing is the riskiest option. So just to recap, put people and their well-being at the center and support and strengthen governance, local capacity and leadership, and measure the impact of those investments. Again, for agriculture, the same. Rethink agriculture diversification for restoration, ecological processes, resilient nutrition, but also measure the impact and the comparative advantage of different arrangements or different diversification strategies. And then finally, mobilize and use participatory action research with modeling approaches to foresee, anticipate, and manage those trade-offs and identify what are the other interventions that need to go in tandem to actually achieve healthy ecosystems and healthy people. And again, this is part of the process of the learning, always learning process when going upwards. With that, I would like to thank you so much for listening and looking forward for the discussion.